Hey everybody, welcome to Get to Know Your Wedding Pro. My name is Reed with Best Made Videos. We are a wedding videography company based out of West Seattle, Washington, and I'm joined today by Gabrielle of Black Swan Events, and they are a wedding planning company out of Portland, Oregon. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time today. You know, it's Friday, kind of end of the week before Memorial Day and kind of craziness. So I appreciate you taking time, and I'm sure your busy schedule to come on. Why don't you introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what you do.
Hi. I'm Gabrielle. I'm with Black Swan Events, and we produce the most unique weddings for the most awesome couples all over the country. And we've done a few international ones as well.
So what is it about kind of, weddings in general that really, I can see the smile on your face, here on the webcam when you talk about it. So talk to me kind of about, your enjoyment of weddings and events and kind of why do you do what you do?
Oh my God. Okay. It's really easy. People entrust us with some of the most significant moments of their lives. I have the best job in the world. I've spent 25 plus years in the industry, and I came up through food and beverage. So I was a food and beverage director for a couple of major hotels. And the thing that I always kept finding myself doing was going back into the ballrooms and going back into the sales office, because what I loved doing was the coordination of the events. And finally, one of my bosses said to me, if you love doing it, then bloody well just do it. You don't have to keep doing the promotion thing. Do the thing you love. You'll make the money at it. Your clients have a ball. And I sat back and I thought, that just made a lot of sense. So I do corporate events, but the thing that ignites the imagination is when you get to do weddings.
And I kind of feel the similar way. I mean, obviously we do corporate videography as well, but why is it for you the weddings that makes it that much more special?
Because people are coming to you. They have one shot to do this. There are no do-overs when it comes to a wedding. We got one shot to get it right. And you think, well, golly, Gabrielle, you've done, at this point in my career, I think I've done more than 700 weddings. But that's 700 very different stories. Stories from a client who wants to get married in a cathedral of tradition and gold to a client who wants to get married in a cathedral of trees. And neither one is right or wrong. It's what's the story behind it and how do we bring that story to life, preferably without putting the client into bankruptcy, which these days is a bloody easy thing to do. These weddings are getting insane in cost.
Do you like that, seeing these higher budgets and things, or are you kind of looking out for the client and going, oh, well, this could be like a house payment,
I'm working on a wedding right now that could easily pay for a home in one of the most affluent areas of Portland. And that client has just as brilliant a vision as my 20-something client who's paying for her college debt, who's trying to buy a house, who's got their car payment. I guess at this point in my career, it's more about the story that we're getting to tell. I'm not the biggest company out there, and I have no desire to be anymore. There was a time where I had a staff of 35 people, and we were running 5 and 6 weddings in a weekend. And what happened is I wasn't getting to spend as much time with my clients. I was losing that touch. And so I stepped back. And now I only do a handful of weddings every year, and I handle every element of that wedding with the client from start to finish. And the big budgets are fabulous, but in no way does how much money you spend on your wedding dictate how memorable that wedding is going to be. There's basic things that have to be addressed, absolutely. But I have seen enormous amounts of money thrown at weddings, and they were no better received. They created no better an experience for the guest than somebody who did it much more modestly. But they were there and present and joyful with their guest.
Yeah, I mean, and just talking about kind of your story, having so many years and kind of the number of weddings, and you just had to have seen, trends come and go and mentalities shift and priorities change, over the years. I mean, what do you think is, the most surprising things today that you kind of encountered that maybe you didn't think you would have to worry about, 10 years ago?
I think, honestly, the most exciting thing is the evolution of videography, because I don't want to date myself here, but we were doing weddings when videography first came onto the scene. And I thought, well, this is an interesting thing. And now what we see is the number one regret in the industry. Talk to a couple 3 years after their wedding. What's the number one regret? We get it 6 months after. I didn't have a professional videographer. And this bears nothing because you and I are talking and this is what you do for a living. It's because if a picture is worth 1,000 words, videography is invaluable. The voices that are going to be there at your wedding will eventually be silenced. The child that you haven't even thought of having yet will one day get to see mom and dad or the couple. And you will never be more beautiful than you are on that day. The gentleman will never be more handsome than they are that day because there's a light that comes from that. And I know it sounds corny, but 700 weddings into this, I still see it. It's still very, very real. The people who raise their glasses and toast you, in that moment, they are so alive. And one day, there will be memories. And when we hear clients say, my regret, the number one regret is that they didn't spend the money on good videography. So that's the big change.
No, and I appreciate you saying that. We just booked a wedding for, I guess it's 3 or 4 weeks from now, where the sister had a huge regret, and she basically, her sister's now getting married, and she just said, "I'm doing this and I'm paying for it," and obviously, they don't want to make the day bad for her sister, but she said, I don't care, I regretted this, and I'm not going to have you regret it, and so she reached out and booked me, and now the sister's excited, but it was because of that regret that she had getting married 3 or 4 years ago. So
it's a huge investment. I mean, this is not a bill. This is an investment. And when you asked me, well, what's changed? I think one of the biggest things that's changed is how, to be honest, how expensive these weddings are getting. There was a time where you got married in the place of your choice, you had a simple reception, and then the bride and the groom would go off on their honeymoon. Now, because of social media, because of cultural expectations, they are growing into these multi-day events and carrying, in many cases, enormous price tags on them. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as your budget is such that you're not putting yourself in extended debt. It's not right for anyone to start their marriage in crushing debt. So let's figure out, how do we create this extraordinary day, this memorable day for you, a wonderful experience for your guests, and not incur crushing debt in the process. And there are lots of ways to do it, and those are going to be different depending on the client's story and the expectations of that couple.
So obviously, you had to have worked with, just a wide range of, clients and couples over the years. What kinds of couples do you find that are attracted to you and the way that you work, and what kind of couples do you like to work with?
I want, at this point in my career, to work with the client who's got the interesting story, the clients who know what it is that they want to share with their guests. And that may be 100 people in a small winery, or it may be 750 people in a major venue that we brought the groom in on a horse for a parade that required shutting down a street in downtown Portland to have the parade to welcome the groom to the ceremony site. Be nice. I don't care how affluent my client is. If they're not nice, if they're grumpy, I now have the ability to walk away and say, I'm not playing in that sandbox. I want the client who understands how joyful this is.
It's funny. Yeah, we just booked a wedding for August, and they're moving to China, but they're getting married, but then their circuit, it's kind of rotated around this family barbecue they do every year. So that's the reception. Cool. It's basically like it's like a neighborhood block party. It's all their family and friends, but then they're going to get married, and then that's the reception, right? So it's awesome. But it's way different. But like you said, it's their story, and that's, it's so unique to them, and it's such a they do it every year. It's got this history built in with their family and stuff. And so it's, it's really neat. So
we did one, it's on the website, but we did one last year. And it was interesting because the bride is actually a professional wedding planner. And yet she stepped up. Any of us who do this for a living know, when it's your wedding, hire someone. So we did Katie and Ian's wedding, and they did it this was so cool. It's basically a Boy Scout camp that's been, it's now been privatized, fully restored. And so it was a multi-day event. And it was basically a giant family reunion with this incredible ceremony underneath a cathedral of trees. And I love this, the arch that Katie and Ian got married underneath. Katie's dad, Ian's dad, and Ian built the arch, and then we transferred it to Katie and Ian's home. So now in their backyard, there's this beautiful piece, this piece of their garden, and yet it's where they were married underneath. So every time they go out there and they have coffee in the morning or whatever, that's there. And those are the kind of elements that we work into it.
That's awesome. So I want to kind of get a part of your origin story, kind of how you got involved in this. You know, you said you worked in food and beverage for a while, but where did your start go? I mean, go back as far as we need to kind of get the origin story of the wedding planner now.
There are people who work in restaurants or do food and beverage or event design, and it's what they're doing. And then there are those of us who it is what we do. And I went to university, got 2 business degrees, one from UMass Amherst and then one from Switzerland in international business. But both of them are specialized in hospitality. And so I got picked up by Marriott and did event coordination for Marriott Corporation, and then the Ritz-Carlton, and then came out. There was a little place in Oregon. I was from Boston, and some guy was building a world campus for a company called Nike. And I got brought out to work on the Nike development. And that's what brought me to Oregon. And I was only supposed to be here for 3 years for the development of that conference center and the opening of it. And I fell in love with the place, and I stayed.
What lessons did you learn from obviously these huge, large-scale corporate events that you're able to still focus on, with your weddings and things today?
Oh, this is the coolest thing. It doesn't matter whether your client has a $500,000 budget, $1 million budget, or a $10,000 budget. Every client has their budget, and they're pushing the limits of what they can spend to create this really cool event, whether it's we're opening a world campus or whether we're doing someone's wedding. But the lessons that you learn about logistics and budgeting are absolutely transferable and can be scaled up or scaled down. So if we're doing, honest to God, I'm doing a wedding in July for 500 people, and then I pivot, and in September, I'm doing a wedding for 50 people at a winery. And the client who reached out to me to do the 50-person wedding came to me and said, all I want to do is just hire you for a couple hours because there's no way I can afford you. And you don't do weddings like mine. I sat with this woman, and she is charming. And I said, we'll do your wedding. And we adjusted the price point, and it's cost effective for her to do. She's doing a lot of her own DIY elements. We're coming in and doing the logistics and operations so that the day that she wants is going to go smoothly. And we did it affordably. But it's the ability to scale and use what are the skills you learned when you're doing a 500-person event. Can you transfer this down? And what can you take? What were the cost-saving tips? I mean, tricks I've learned from my 100-person events. You turn around and pivot and do that for a corporate client, they're thrilled. And the truth of the matter is I learned it from a bride who said, oh, let's try this. Cool. The day I stop learning from my clients is the day you might as well put me out to pasture.
That's awesome. Yeah, you had said kind of in your kind of podcast questionnaire, about kind of when and how to do DIY and when is that effective. So talk about that and kind of your philosophy of that, because obviously that's a big thing we see nowadays with cost cutting. I always say one of the stories I tell on the podcast is my friend Dominic got married and they were up till like 4 a.m. doing their own flowers before the wedding because they were trying to save money. And I think if you had asked him later, maybe they would have DIY'd something else and not that, because then he wouldn't have been up till 4 a.m. So what is your belief in that? And just kind of, you had mentioned you were interested in talking about that. So
absolutely. When and why to DIY. And I wish I could tell you that here's the 3 things that are going to apply to everyone. They're not. But what I will tell you is there's a system that does apply to everyone. So when you're looking at doing your wedding, if I told you that there were 3 keys to making an unforgettable event and not going bankrupt, and the answer to every question you're going to come up with, you actually have the answer. You may not have the logistics of how to make it happen, but you know the answer. The same thing that drove you to knowing that you're marrying the right spouse is the same thing that is going to help you answer, how do I do this or that? So look at the people around you that love you, who care about you, and are saying, hey, we want to help. We want to do this. We want to do that. The first thing you want to do is crystallize your vision of what is your story. The 3 elements to planning an incredible event is honor your story, honor your budget, and honor your guest. So when and why the DIY, look at your story. And so for Katie, it was to get married in the forest in the Pacific Northwest. They loved that. They knew that was right. So we started to define what that story was going to be and where was it going to happen. But then people are coming forward saying, well, we want to help you. We want to help you. Knowing when to accept a gift from a guest, somebody who says, let me shoot. I want to be the photographer. You know, I'm studying photography at school, and I'd love to shoot your wedding. I'll give it to you as a wedding gift. And it's great practice for me. I invite clients to consider hire the very best your money can afford and then allow them to do their job. Your wedding is no place for someone to practice their craft. And I understand that we have to balance that with budgets. But if you're going to allow somebody to give you that gift and you're going to accept it, are you going to be okay if the results were not what a professional is going to deliver? And that may be absolutely okay with you, but you privately have to sit with that and go, exact same scenario, 2 different clients. Wedding cake. For one client, the sister says, let me make you your wedding cake. She's baking for another bakery in the city. She did beautiful work. And Katrina said, yes, I'd love for you to make my wedding cake. And the day of the wedding, the cake was fabulous. It was a wee bit of kimbo, just a wee bit of kimbo. We fixed it with flowers, no big deal. It was gorgeous, but it was a kimbo. For a more...
What does that mean? Sorry.
A kimbo, cattywampus. Crooked, yeah. Okay. It leaned a little bit, like the Tower of Pisa.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Sorry, I spent too much time in Europe. So the cake was a little cattywampus, but again, being photographed well, you never saw it in the photographs, but it was just slightly askew. And there are some brides that would not have been okay with them. Katrina was able to look at this and say, it's beautiful, it was made with love, and oh golly, it was delicious. She accepted the gift with grace from her sister and allowed the human element to come into it. Professionals are going to nail it. We have to nail it. It's what we do day in and day out. So when you choose to have somebody entrusted with a piece of your wedding, are you okay if it maybe doesn't come out exactly the way you planned? And one of the ways we address that is accept these DIY elements for things that can be done months or weeks ahead of time. If somebody says to you, I make invitations, I'm a fabulous scrapbooker, and it's just terrific, awesome. If those invitations can be done 2 months ahead of time, doesn't mean you're going to mail them. It means they're done. Then, if something goes sideways, you can always go to a professional or you have time to fix it. Maybe it's going to be a little bit more money. Maybe the timing, as happened on one of these where somebody DIY'd their invitations, and by accident, they put the wrong ceremony time. We had to reproduce the invitations. It wasn't the end of the world, but it was a little bit more expensive. The money that they saved, they actually ended up spending because we had to have the invitations remade. But, you know, you live and learn. That was something the client really, really wanted to do. Look at the gift you're going to accept as a DIY element and say, is this going to be completed 2 weeks before my wedding? If it isn't, I discourage you from doing it because 2 weeks before the wedding, you should be focusing on your guests who are coming in from out of town, on the last things for you as the bride or you as the groom to complete and be able to enjoy that day. Not be running around getting flowers and making food and that sort of thing. Can I tell you another story? Because you can always edit this stuff out.
That's perfect.
Okay. So one of the most powerful DIY elements I ever had, I had been hired to come in and critique a facility. I was not working the event. I was hired to come in and assess how was the facility functioning by the event owners. And I watched an incredible wedding go off. The wedding happened. It was a big ballroom. The wedding happened upstairs. And then on the lower floor is where the reception was happening. The dad was a caterer here in Portland. He was very, very, very good at what he did. And he was the father of the bride. So just a few minutes before the wedding ended, the father slipped away to go downstairs to make sure everything was ready in the ballroom for their guests. And sure it was. Cocktail party was great. Dinner was great. And at the end of the night, all the tables are being broken down, the guests are long gone, and I see the father sitting in this basically empty ballroom. His daughter is long gone, and he is wiped out. Bow ties undone, shirts unbuttoned, and he is exhausted. And I walked over to congratulate him and to say, "You did a bang-up job. What an extraordinary gift you gave your daughter," because it was flawless. And as I approached this man at about 1:30 in the morning, I realized that he had tears in his eyes, and I thought, oh, he must be happy about the event. And I introduced myself, and I went to thank him, and I didn't even finish the statement. And he looked at me and he said, "I missed my daughter's wedding." I will never forget that man. He gave such an extraordinary gift. And yet when his daughter looked out, when they announced her married, her dad wasn't there. He was making sure the next part of the event was ready. And that was a very high price to pay. So I just invite people to really think carefully. Anybody who's going to work your day, who's going to be a photographer or a videographer or do your flowers, they are not guests at your wedding. They are giving that up to work your wedding.
No, and that's such a touching story. And I mean, you know, I can even see kind of the tears it brings to your eyes, you know, recounting it, because you know, I could feel, you know, I kind of see where it's going, right, as you're telling it, and it's so sad. But I do think that that's honestly one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever heard. Just kind of the way you phrased it about DIYing things that you can kind of spell check or proof before your wedding, right? That things like, you know, photography, videography, DJ, even flowers, like these things, you know, if it's, you know, if they screw up, it's done, right? There's no redos. There's, you know, we always hear that, you know, wedding's a one-time thing. But yeah, like all these things, like even your dress, right? Like if you want to, well, my friend's a dressmaker, we want to do it, I'm going to get it 4 months early. Well, then if it's a stinker, then you can go out and get something else or figure out a different plan. But these things where it's like, you know, execution only day of, you know, should not be the things. Because I see that all the time, you know. Oh, hey, we're just breaking into videography. You know, we need clients, or we're young and cheap and we need clients, or we're just trying to figure all this out. And I mean, yeah, chances are that you know, I always say, you know, I wasn't always a wedding videographer, but you know, I had shot video professionally in news for, you know, 10 years before I did it. I felt like I had at least enough knowledge to walk in and kind of figure out, you know, what was going on. But, you know, you, like you said, don't DIY the things that you only have one shot at. I think it's such a great way to put it. I mean, we have one of my friends up here is a DJ, and she's done, I don't know, she always talks like 1,000 weddings, or I don't know, they've done a ton of weddings. And she eloped, and even though she had heard for years, you know, horror stories about photography and, you know, video and all this stuff, they had their friend that was a whatever photographer do their wedding photography, and like they got 2 photos that worked out of whatever they shot, because, you know, and I don't know really what, you know, I don't want to like ask, you know, well, what really happened there to, you know, walk me through this disaster. But, you know, all I know is there was equipment issues and they didn't get them. And she's told me, she goes, Reed, you know, for years I had seen all these stories and heard all these stories about, you know, trying to do this and trying to do that and failure. And then she said, I was one of those same people that had the same thing happen to me, even though I had heard it for 20 years.
And I bet the reason that happened 9 times out of 10 is financially based. We're looking at it saying, I can't afford this. And I hear that. So what can we adjust? What are the cornerstones that are unshakable, that we have to have in the wedding? And that's going to vary from client to client, because one client, food may be an integral part of the wedding. It's a cultural part of the wedding. For another client, that's not quite as important. But music, golly, we got to do a wedding for a woman who was first chair violin in the symphony. And so music was a huge part of that wedding. And that was where money was spent. It's also where we were able to accept really gracious gifts from her friends who played the music during the ceremony. That's a DIY element that is perfectly appropriate and exactly what you want to be accepting. There are other times where, not so much.
Yeah, no, I mean, and obviously people, they're not going into it and offering it, because they want to do a lousy job, right? I mean, I think that's also the thing too is, we had, when we got married, one of my wife's friends, she does a lot of like project management stuff. And she said like, let me help you guys out. Like, let me, that be, the gift that I can do to help plan your wedding. And I said, no, because I need somebody at the end of the day that I can yell at if things aren't, that I can hold accountable. Mm-hmm. And, you're trying to do this, as a gift to be nice. And if something happens, I don't feel like I can, for lack of a better word, yell at you the same way I could for somebody that I'm paying, $3,000 to. It's just different levels of accountability. And like you said, when you're, if you're a professional, you're going to execute because you have to execute, right?
I don't know if I'm able to send you pictures, but another DIY element that went really, really well. Another client had a friend who was a chef, and he made the centerpieces, and I now use this on a lot of my weddings. He made these beautiful edible centerpieces. So that whole when and why to DIY, he, in the hours before the wedding, on site, created 25 beautiful, they were basically like fruit and cheese plates on these beautiful wooden discs, and they became the edible centerpieces. Now, they weren't all identical. They didn't need to be. The look was wonderful, and he was still able to walk out, enjoy the ceremony, enjoy the reception. That was it. That was his gift to them. A great way to do a DIY element. But again, you have to, when we work with a client, especially a client who's a budget client, and people look at my weddings and they think, oh, she never works with a budget client. I absolutely do work with clients who are honoring their budgets. And the first thing we do is we sit down and we look at, what's your vision? This is the one time that you get to throw the budget out the window. It's the only time you're going to get to do this. Tell me what your dream is. Do you want to get married by the ocean? Do you want to get married in the forest? Do you want to get married in a traditional cathedral? What is your thing? We figure that out. And then the next thing we do is we look at who are the skills, the knowledge, and the abilities of the people who love you. And are we going to utilize those? And we begin to build a dream team. And it's the people who are going to help you do this, and it's the professionals that we're going to bring to the table. And it is never, never, never the same, because no people's stories are the same. So what we need is going to vary, and then we go from there, and that's how we start building the budget out. And we do that at the very, very beginning. People say, well, how do I make a budget? I love it when they come to me and they say, I have this budget. If you haven't crystallized your vision, there's no way in the world we're going to have an accurate budget for you. And when you try to download a budget from the computer because, well, a wedding for 100 people, I love this. A wedding for 100 people averages $35,000 in America. Yeah. Where in America, and what does that wedding look like? It can be a lot less. It can be a lot more. It just depends on who that client is.
Well, and even like, Seattle, I mean, I know has like, at least in terms of some of the clients I work with, has a wildly different budget than even Portland or obviously Spokane or, like even just the city, the $35,000 is way different depending on, I mean, that's freaking the Ritz-Carlton and, middle of nowhere versus, doing it right in like New York City.
Yeah.
Do you find when you're working with couples kind of planning and like you said I like how you said that figure out like what your vision is, strengths, who do you have in your life? Do you find that you're having to kind of balance between if it's like bride and groom or whatever, like if they want two radically different things, or how do you kind of like mesh that together, and is that part of how does that happen?
I'm really lucky. By the time clients come to me, they've already I don't recall where I've ever had an experience. Oh, yeah, I have. Where the groom's vision and the bride's vision, or the fact is I have grooms and brides, but where the two parties are radically opposite. By the time they've decided to get married, they both respect each other enough that what we do see is sometimes one is much more outgoing and gregarious, and one is inclined to have a very big celebration, and the other is much, much more reserved. So those are the considerations we have to take into account. We did a young couple, another one where we did it. It's the Pacific Northwest. Everyone loves to do their weddings outside. Elizabeth and Sean, we did super nice young couple. We did their wedding at Louisville Park. All right, so this is a couple who they're paying for college loans. Their priority They wanted to get married, but their priority was they wanted to buy a house. So they came to me and said, kind of sheepishly, we don't have a lot of money, but we're trying to do this, and we're really not sure how to navigate these waters. So we picked, this is one of your DIY elements. We created something called a table of bounty for them. And this does not work for everyone, but it worked for this family. They had a really strong support group around them. We did about 130 guests. We used a beautiful Louisville Park in Battleground, Washington. And we had caterers do the big barbecue, the pulled beef and the pulled chicken. But then a group of guests, about 15 of their guests, got together, and this one did, it was a table of bounty. This was well beyond a potluck. It was, this one did potato salad for 15, and this one did the German potato salad for 15, and this one did the most beautiful caprese salad. And all of these different people who had been a part of her life, who had been a part of family meals for so many years, brought the signature dishes that Elizabeth grew up on and presented them on this incredible buffet table. And so, no, there wasn't enough of, Aunt Annabelle's baked beans for 110 people, but there were other dishes that were there. But it was like a trip down memory lane. It took a tremendous amount of logistic coordination to make sure we had that. But that was the gift that they gave each person who participated in this. We created a table of bounty. We knew the food that was going to be there. We knew the quantities that were going to be there. And that was their gift to Elizabeth and Sean, each one making a piece of a patchwork quilt. And then when it was put together, it was extraordinary. Like I said, that is not something I would typically encourage people to do. That's a nightmare in the making. But it can be done.
I was going to joke when you said that you've never had a couple that had two wildly different viewpoints. I was going to say, then you didn't plan my wife and I's wedding because no, but I just, where I felt like I definitely had like certain opinions about, I think more just feeling as like a wedding vendor that I had to do things technically correct. Like, well, this is how it should be done, so this is how we should do it, kind of thing. Where maybe looking back now, I was probably a little too stubborn on certain things. But it was just funny when you said that. I said, I bet Rebecca that did my wedding would probably say a little different. But do you find working with the families and things, and like you said, with like your last story, but if having the couples what they want, and then do you ever have to deal with like families wanting different things or outside influences, and how do you, because I do think it's really tough nowadays, especially when we have, I would say, like, a good portion of our couples are working and paying for things themselves, and then there's a good portion of our couples that are relying on money from their parents, and I think that there is different levels of expectations right on that side where you have to maybe mom and dad have certain opinions, and you do have to kind of listen to that a little bit, because it's a more difficult relationship, right?
It is. And that has happened on every single wedding I've worked on. I have never had a wedding where that hasn't been the case. Because inherently, if you're hiring a planner, if you're working with a planner, we've got something of size. We're not doing a wedding that's 5 people. That's an elopement. And so all of those people are so enthusiastic about the wedding, and they love the couple so much that they're really eager to bring their really great ideas to the table. And sometimes they don't recognize the price tag that is going to have. Or maybe what was your great idea and what was such a brilliant fit for you is not a brilliant fit for your child. And that's a struggle, because they so much want that enthusiasm to be shared. So those are waters that we navigate very carefully and very respectfully. But understand, my experience is that when we distill it down, that enthusiasm from the people who are giving oh, you've got to, or you should, or what are you thinking? It all comes from a place of love. And if we can stand there, then we pull that negative emotion out and we just navigate it.
Yeah, because they're always good ideas, right? Nobody has an idea and they're like, well, this is really bad, but you should definitely do this one.
It's just, logistically, it may not work. And that's often the case. Or maybe it doesn't fit the client's vision. But there are those 3 keys. Remember, I said, honor your story, because more than anything else, that is the single thing that's going to guarantee an extraordinary event. Honor your budget. That's sort of, the nuts and bolts behind the scene. Nobody really has to see that. Honor your guest. Because the most important party you will ever throw in your life is on the first day of your marriage. At your wedding, you are absolutely the people of honor, the guest of honor. But you are also the host and hostess of the most important party you are ever going to throw. And how you handle that day, how joyful you are, you're going to have a couple hundred people possibly together. I guarantee something's going to pop up. It always does. How you handle that is going to be what your guests remember. If you can laugh something off, you laugh it off. All of these people came together to share this moment of joy with you. It's all good. Certainly we don't want dinner to be an hour late, and we don't want it to be a 90-degree day and there not be ice cold water. I mean, there are logistical things that have to happen. But the rest of it, honor your guests by being joyful that day. Planning well will give you that.
Yeah, we have an officiant, Pierre Ray, and he's been on the podcast before, and he's married, I don't know, thousands of couple, he's been doing it for 35 years. And his, we were talking, and he always said to him, it's so important because, I asked him, well, some people nowadays, like, weddings are too big, or it's such, it's all this waste of money, or it's all this time, or, and I said, well, what do you think about that? I said, you've been doing this a long time. And he said, doing the wedding and having it be this thing is so important for a couple to kind of have to go through together and kind of plan, and some people, some give and some take and compromise, and balancing family and balancing money and balancing expectations and all these things. And he said, like, the wedding itself, but it's getting that preparation and doing all that, having to come together with your partner and figure that out is so important. And so I always just thought that was such an interesting way to look at it. That, I mean, the wedding maybe doesn't even need to happen. It's just the planning and preparation for. I mean, obviously you want to have a big party and have everyone have fun, but what do you think about kind of that?
I think it's spot on. It is the process. It's the journey, and that's why we want, when we're working with couples, this time that should be the most joyful, the most fun for you and your partner, to begin to build what is this celebration going to look like. Your wedding is an outward proclamation of a very private commitment. And the road to get there should be one that the couple, yes, it's going to be stressful because inevitably there's always a lot of money associated with it, but it should be as joyful and smooth as possible. And the key is as possible. And how you navigate those waters respectfully to each other is going to be the first indicator of the first real test of the challenges that you're going to encounter for the rest of your life. So bravo for you for doing it.
Yeah, it is funny because obviously we interact with lots of, couples on the wedding day. And it is always kind of interesting, for us to kind of see, you get to see that interaction, right? And if someone's, if someone's hot or cranky or tired, or you really kind of get to see these, I don't know, just indications of kind of how they handle stress and kind of, maybe they balance each other out, where one is, a little more high strung and the other is laid back. Or I mean, it's just always interesting to kind of see those interactions kind of as you go through the wedding day.
Mm-hmm.
So as someone, that's been around for so long and done so many weddings, and it's just kind of been in this industry, like, what would be, just in terms of like a business running, doing this thing, what would be, some advice that you would give to like other, wedding vendors of like, how do you stay on top of the game like you have and kind of continue to grow? Or you can take that any which way, but what is a lesson that you would have for other vendors out there to kind of be, obviously the success that you've had?
I'm not sure that I have a lesson so much as a thank you. Thank you to those vendors, those wedding professionals who bring the very best of themselves every single day to the table, who bring that A game to the table. Thank you to those who do transparent billing. If I was to share something, and this does not always make me popular, but I feel very, very strongly that billing has to be transparent. And so with Black Swan, if you are going to work with us, if you're a client who's going to work with us, and this is an important piece of information for any couple who will be interviewing a planner in particular, we are business people. Your wedding is a business. And in the next 5 years, other than buying a house, the most significant investment a couple is going to make, the largest one, is this wedding. It is a business. So when you work with a wedding planner, you want to make sure you're working with somebody who's experienced, and you want to make sure that all of the invoicing that's done with the other wedding professionals, that they are not taking any kickbacks or percentages of that. You pay a top fee for an experienced wedding planner, but we get different pricing. So all of the discounts that we get passed on to the client. We don't get to take our fees and then also have our hands in the pockets of every other vendor, whether it's rentals or catering or anything else. That is an ethical issue, and some companies do it. We do not. We make sure that all discounts, all industry considerations is another term for that, are passed directly on to the client. So when people say, oh my God, having a wedding planner, that's just such an expense, it's a luxury. It is not a luxury, it's smart business. They will get you more for the dollars you spend, and they will make sure you have a really great day, that you and your guests are free to enjoy the wedding day. So for all the vendors who make this possible, who bring these clients' visions to life, that's a thank you. I don't have advice to give them. I only have thanks to give them.
How would you address, I've always talked on the podcast about how being a wedding planner is one of the hardest things to kind of market or advertise or like prove. I mean, obviously you've proven your value for, a decade now, but, videography, like I can show a video, and like, a DJ, it's like the most successful wedding planner is one that people didn't even know was there, right? Because everything went off in that. So how do you market that? How do you make sure, because obviously people know your value. So how do you make sure that your value is seen and appreciated, and how do you educate clients?
That's a really tough one. At this point, most of my clients come to me because they've attended one of my events, and it's word of mouth. Almost all of my clients come to me by reference. I would love to say that I'm a master of social media and I know how to use. I don't. My clients come to me by reference. If I have a weakness, it is my understanding and use of social media.
But before you had that kind of that referral base, how did you stand out, or how did you kind of market yourself that way? Because obviously you haven't been known incredibly forever. So how did you going back?
I was well established with corporate before I went out on my own. So I already had a client base when I worked with corporate, and that's what I drew from. We do one great event, and you just pray the next big one's going to come down. And it always does. Thank God it always does. But it's got to be the same for you. You guys do a couple good events. You're doing good, but what's the next 3 months going to bring? What's the next 6 months going to bring? We're only as good as the last event we produced. That's the joy of being your own business owner. There's no guarantee.
Yeah, no, and that's always something that I've thought about. And maybe I'll just leave all this in because this is interesting. But, I always thought, because I've been doing this now for, 5 or 6 years, kind of doing, the wedding videographer thing full time. And, you always think like, oh, well, at some point, like I'm just going to be able to cruise, or I'm not going to have to stress. No. And it's like, it is, with weddings, it's like you come, especially, in the Pacific Northwest where it's so seasonal, end of October, and you're like, oh crap, like I got to do all this again. I got to do all this again for next year. And it's just so interesting to me because I really did think like, oh, well, after I've been doing this for 2, 3, 4 years, like I'll just cruise, and they'll all come, and it's like, we're still, every week it's like, how can you refine this or do that? Do you obviously feel the same way? Oh God, yes.
And the thing is that in the industry, we're not really allowed to talk about that because there's a sense of, well, nobody wants to be around a loser. You only want to be around the winners. So we all put our very best face forward. And yeah, we're always producing the greatest events. I have no, but when I finish, and I'm not a fool, I recognize how lucky I am. I'm working on a $500,000 wedding right now. I am incredibly lucky to be working on this wedding, that they're trusting me with this. But I don't know that another one's going to come down the pipeline. I pray it will. I know I'm going to be in several ballrooms filled with people who are prospective clients, and they now know who I am. But there's no guarantee. And yeah, I won't. Every few months, I have that little, oh my God, what's going to come down the pipeline next? Please, please let something else come down the pipeline. And thank God it does. But yeah, there's always that trepidation. Are we going to be able to pull another rabbit out of our hat?
Yeah, it's so interesting, and like you said, where people always put, every person is always booking a million clients and everybody's always, and it is, like you said, and as part of, I'm sure that's just kind of part of social media in general, right? Or online where they say like, people only post about the good stuff and, all that sort of stuff. But it is in terms of like, vendors, people don't always necessarily talk about like, real numbers and real bookings are real, it's always, it's a constant kind of struggle to reinvent and figure out something else. And does that scare you, or does that just kind of invigorate you to keep kind of seeing what's out there?
Yeah, no, it terrifies me. It just bloody terrifies me. Because it does. It makes you, how good you are at what you do. I know I'm good at what I do. And it's not arrogance. It just is. I've been doing it for this long. There isn't much I haven't seen there. And so when stuff, you begin to develop the ability to anticipate. And so you're able to plan well. And when we plan well, then astonishingly, our events go really smoothly. But you still worry, am I going to get, what are my sales next month going to look like? What are my sales in a year from now going to look like? Okay, I'm good for 6 months. What's 6 months out going to look like? And that has never stopped. I don't know. I'll let you know when the day comes that I can just go back on cruise control and go, oh yeah, it's all coming to me. I got this dialed out. But 25 years into this industry, the only time it ever came like that was when I was on salary and I worked for someone else. And then I lost the control of being able to guarantee I was looking out for my client's best interest. And so I will take that chance so that I continue to have the control that I want to have and deliver what I need to be able to deliver to my clients.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because I do feel like we're getting into that way too, where you've done so many, like you said, like good wedding vendors aren't successful because of luck. It's because they've spent a lot of time and energy and money and knowledge and all these. It doesn't just happen out of the blue, right? I mean, it's all this preparation. But yeah, I know what you mean. My wife's friend got married and I attended. I offered to do the video and and they didn't want it, and it was totally that thing of like, I felt like I was the MVP that was coached or that was benched, like for the big game, right? And I felt like I have this knowledge and expertise and willingness to want to help, because again, at the end of the day, all you want to do is provide the best experience. And it did feel like I was like shackled, that I wasn't able to give in the way that you want to, or even just advise and kind of give, perspective in that way. So I definitely know what you mean on that.
I did. This is kind of jumping back, but we were talking about, like you were saying, people practicing the craft. The reason that the professionals get the results they get, it's what we do day in and day out. I would never dream of walking into one of my clients' job sites and be able to do their job. My clients do all sorts of different things for a living, but never could I step into their shoes and do their job. And yet we expect these couples to be able to step into the role of a wedding planner or a videographer or photographer, but particularly the planner, because, well, after all, it's just a wedding. How difficult can that be to plan? And it's not until they're in the weeds and they realize, oh my gosh, there's a lot to this. I mean, how many times we've all heard that? Oh my God, I had no idea there was so much to this. Well, by that time, maybe they've signed contracts that we could have negotiated better. Maybe they've made commitments that could have been done in a more cost-effective way. I can't undo a contract once it's signed. So if you can bring your planners in at the very, very beginning one of the things that you said, well, what are you doing to change, to stay relevant? What we were seeing were a lot of clients in the more approachable budget weddings could not afford planners, and they were the ones who needed the planners the most. So we created a package that was a newly engaged package, and we sit down with the couples at the very, very beginning, and we sit down with them for 2.5 hours. And when they walk out of that meeting, their wedding vision is crystallized, their dream team, which is who are the assets that we have and what are the professionals we're going to need. Their dream team is developed, the wedding vision is crystallized. Once you have a dream team, you can start drafting a budget. We do a 6-month timeline and a day of timeline. They walk out with 5 key documents. Once you have your day of timeline, even if it's a first draft, now you can start going to vendors and saying, I need a videographer and I need it for this time frame. And your videographers can help put together the most cost-effective packages. But how do you begin to build a budget if you don't even know what the needs are? So that was one of the things that you asked, what are you doing as clients are changing? And they are changing, and that was a need that became clear. And we created that because of my 50-person wedding that we're doing up at the Vineyard in September.
Oh, that's our wedding tomorrow. I got the timeline last night because we didn't have.
Oh my God.
Yeah, well, and it's one of those, you try to be patient, and we had their DJ timeline, so we knew, okay, because obviously knows what he's doing, and okay, guests come in at 3, 4, 5, and all this stuff, and I go, yeah, I said, but we need to know, like, what time are you getting ready, or do you want that captured, are we doing the, I said, we're about halfway there, because I had gotten out a couple days ago, and that was, he said, oh, here you go, this is it. But it's funny because, like you said, just getting those, trying to figure out, like, what's going on. I had a call today for a groom that was looking for photo and video for August 3rd, and it's like...
It's August 3rd?
Yeah, and and so you're constantly like trying to educate, and like you said, you wish that people like you could kind of get in front of potential clients way earlier and figure out, like, okay, this is what's going on and this is what you need to do.
Yeah, you were asking me what would I give advice, and to the general the other professionals like the videographers, the photographers, and the caterers and stuff, I wouldn't give advice because that's your field of expertise. But for planners, for God's sakes, come up with something that you can sit with a client and get them started in the right direction. Maybe they're not going to hire you, but at least you've turned them loose, better educated for the time they did spend with you. And what we do with that is, yes, clients pay for that. That's not a freebie. But if you choose to hire us, that goes in full to your package price. So it ultimately does become a value add to them. But they can move forward ready to make their next decisions from a place of education. And then you guys, the videographer, would much rather see somebody who's coming going, well, we're just beginning to plan, but here's our timeline. This is what we think it's going to look like. And we need you for 6 hours. What can you do with this?
No, I think that's a great point. And like you said, it's tough for planners because obviously you want them to, they want to book them and whatever, but even just educating and getting the word out there, I think that's a really interesting way to do it. I think that's a good idea.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll let you know next year how it works because we're rolling it out this year. But so far, it's working quite nicely.
That's great. So, as we're kind of starting to wrap up here, and you've been so gracious with your time. I really appreciate it. What do you wish more people knew about, you or your company or wedding planning, or kind of, I know this is like the biggest, but what would kind of be your final piece of advice that you would want to leave today, that you would want people listening to know?
Well, I'd love you to know that I live on a big giant sailboat. So when you all go back home to your house tonight, I go back home to a big giant sailboat that I live on with a big giant German Shepherd. So any meeting that you have with me, chances are that big giant German Shepherd's going to walk into the meeting with me. We are as unique as the clients that we take care of. The other thing, this is, I don't know, Reed, you may totally choose to edit this out. I always did the weddings and the events and loved them, but everything changed about 3 years ago. I didn't get married until later in life. I built a company. And I met and married the most extraordinary man. And we were married for 9 years. And my athletic, healthy husband got cancer. And I stepped away from my work for 2 years. And Molly with Soiree, who's just an amazing planner here in Portland, God bless her, stepped up. And any clients that I had who called, we referred to Molly. And we were told, we have no hope to give and no cure to offer. The man you love will be dead in 10 months. And that changed everything. So I took 2 years, and I only did a couple of clients over the 2-year period of time. And we left the United States and got treatment abroad. And ultimately, we had just over 2 years of an extraordinary life together. And Michael passed away. But I know what love looks like. And I got to marry one of those princes. So if I get to help other couples do that, that's really cool. And so, yeah, I look at this as business. It's how I make my living. And I recognize that we are in an industry where the product is our bride and our grooms. But I will always see the humanity in it in a way that I didn't before. And I wouldn't change it. So, yeah, I'm probably a little different than a lot of the planners out there. And I'm not for everyone. But by God, if I am for you, nobody will ever forget the wedding we create together.
Oh, and thank you so much for sharing that. And it has just been such a remarkably fascinating conversation I've had with you today. I appreciate you so much for, sharing your stories and coming on, and certainly opening up like that. And it does mean a lot. And I knew from the second you got on the excitement in your face and, the joy in your eyes when you kind of talk about, weddings and the love that you have for what you do and the clients you work with. So I really appreciate you coming. It's just been fascinating. It's been really interesting. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing.
Thank you.
If people want to know more about you, your planning services, everything you have to offer and all your, countless hours of expertise, where would you have them check out?
Oh, super easy. Just go to my website, blackswanevents.net. That's all you got to do. There's videos, there's pictures. We've got a Facebook, it's linked. And actually, a lot of stuff has been posted on Wedding Wire about us. So, and give me a phone call. Call me. I would love to hear about, I don't care whether it's big or whether it's little. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call me. If you're doing something really remarkable, if love has walked into your life, call me. Let's create something extraordinary.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. This has been, like I said, I can't say enough how fascinating and just fun this conversation has been today. But it's been such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for taking time, like I said, on a Friday before Memorial Day. And I just really do appreciate your time and expertise to come on and share some knowledge today.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of Get to Know Your Wedding Pro. If you are a wedding vendor and you're interested in sharing your story on the podcast, you can go to www.bestmadevideos.com/podcast guest. I have a really easy way if you're interested in coming on and sharing your story about who you are and what you do as a wedding vendor. I'd love to chat with you. And this has been another episode of Get to Know Your Wedding Pro. Check back next week for another wedding vendor interview. Thanks so much.